The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back. You are comfortably zoned with me, Ralph Tyko, the Tokin Jew. Token with an I, I might add. I'm in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, across the moat from Oakland, and I have the greatest gig in the world. I talk to some of the most interesting people on the face of the planet, and today is no exception. Dan Carubia from Richmond Hill High School. How are you, Dan?
I'm fine, and I used to go over where you used to live because I used to live, when I was transferred out there from my company into San Francisco, I used to live on the Embarcadero for a couple of years and eat at Red's Java House, and then I found a place down the street from the bus stop, which is one of the great sports bars of San Francisco on Union and Laguna. So I'm very familiar where you at, boy. Very familiar.
All right. Growing up in New York is a lot different than California.
Oh, yeah. I listen, when I lived out there, I was wonderful area to live, but I always had my roots here in the New York area and the East Coast, and where I grew up in Richmond Hill, Queens.
Beautiful, beautiful. You know what I'm most interested in? I followed you on Facebook for a long time, and you are a sports aficionado, and like I say, you qualify one of the most interesting people on the planet. Tell me about Norman Rockwell.
Well, this was a situation that happened about 6 years ago. We have two couple friends that we travel with. We're known as a six-pack, and they come over here for New Year's Day and stuff. So about 6 years ago, we went over to the Norman Rockwell Museum, and I was in there for about 10 minutes, and I just got it from the head and the heart to ask if I could volunteer there. I'm retired from a company that I worked for 35 years, and I had nothing to do a lot, and this was a beautiful museum, and I got interviewed, sent my resume in, and then they said, yes, you can work, and I worked about 3 days a week in the front desk there, showing people where to get their tickets, a little bit more about the 35 acres where the Rockwell Museum is situated, what was for dinners and lunches in Stockbridge and the surrounding areas. And then about 6 months later, the director of education said that, would you like to be a docent? And I said, what's a docent? And they said, what you listen to, all the people? And I said, I would love to do it, but I don't have an art background. He said, well, here's a book on Mr. Rockwell, go read it. And from then on, I've been as a docent, as an interpreter for the Norman Rockwell Museum for just about 5 years now. And it has been just it's on 35 acres in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, in the Berkshires. We have 9 galleries, a majority of Norman Rockwell paintings, and I learned so much from the people that were the docents there, some of the models that still come in there that were models for Mr. Rockwell, and the paintings of commonplace people, commonplace stories in commonplace situations, including the Four Freedoms that have their own separate gallery that he did in 1943.
Did Frank Sullivan ever come in?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
And I wasn't there. I missed him.
Oh, my God.
I missed him.
The most famous baseball painting he did. Second most favorite. Most famous.
Yeah.
The first one was with the umpires. And
in Brooklyn.
Yeah, and my Pittsburgh Pirates were in, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
They were checking for a rain delay, and that picture was in my grandmother's kitchen.
Wow.
I'm wondering which. Yes, it was that one. It was that one. The Frank Sullivan came later. That was The Rookie.
Yeah, that was called The Rookie.
Right, and it was the Boston Red Sox, a group of them, and Frank Sullivan was actually a rookie.
Yep.
Wow.
And the guy that posed for The Rookie, his name is, I met him one time. He came into the museum, and he lives in Rochester, New York. Stuart Sullivan, I believe his last name is. And he knew Mr. Rockwell, and he posed for The Rookie, and Bobby Dorr was in the painting, and Ted Williams was supposed to be there, but I don't think he showed up. And, you know, that was, it's all interesting stories how he did all of this and was up front and personal with a lot of the people in the paintings that he did.
Mr. Rockwell was a staple in Look magazine. If I think it was Look, it might have been Life.
It was Look. It was first a Saturday Evening Post, and he did 323 covers for the Saturday Evening Post. He would do about 6 or 7 per year, starting in 1916 and ending in 1963. And then he went to Look and Life magazines as well. Wow.
Tell me the most interesting thing you learned when you read that book that you were first offered by your contemporaries. What's interesting about the man, besides his paintings, they were ingenious, how was he able to get in touch with Americana?
Well, I think at the time, people could relate to a lot of this, just commonplace stuff. A boy in a baby carriage wheeling his baby sister down the street in a suit and seeing his friends in baseball uniforms coming the other way, and their faces and expressions tell a story without any words. The marriage license, a couple getting into the city hall in Stockbridge, the girl on her tippy toes, the man looking just hung out and just depressed because it's 4 o'clock and they walk in exactly when he's going to close the town hall for the day. You know, you look at the 4 freedoms of freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. It tells a story about what Roosevelt spoke about in a talk that he gave to the American people in 1941 about the Lend-Lease program, and then he asked the people he asked a number of artists and illustrators to illustrate what was the last 3 minutes of his speech about the 4 freedoms. And it has all the people from Arlington, Vermont, where he was living, including one guy that's in 4 of the paintings. And wow. So a lot of this stuff is just, people could relate exactly at that period of time to the story that was on the front of the Post cover. And it seems that when Mr. Rockwell got really, really in tune to the Post, every time a Norman Rockwell painting was on the cover of the Post covers, it would amp it up about 10% in the sales of the magazine. And right. Yeah, so it was just commonplace people, commonplace stories, commonplace situations. That's how people related to it.
What would Norman Rockwell think if he came back today and saw the world as it is?
Whoa, we have a couple of people and artists that depicted some of Rockwell's paintings as they would be today. One person is named Pops Peterson, and he had some of his artwork in the museum. And it incorporates a number of different situations now of people of different races and colors and creeds in the paintings. And it might not be exactly as we might have seen it back in the 1920s or 30s, but depicting on something like somebody would be at a kitchen table with families, but he might be on his iPhone or a computer while everybody else might be talking, you know? I think he would depict that and it might be people of different ethnic backgrounds at a swimming hole and stuff like that. So I think he would be most adaptable to the stories of today of commonplace people, but it would be a little bit different from the aspect of the type of people, and I guess it would be some of the different things that they would be wearing. So, that would be some of the things that might be different, like an iPhone or, listening to a headset or something like that versus just sitting down and talking one-on-one with people.
What was he like as a person?
I never met the gentleman, but from everybody, from the models, and one lady who was a model in 3 of the paintings in Arlington, Vermont, she was a young little girl. She said when she was finished talking to him, he would put you at ease first and make you aware that how he wanted maybe you to pose, and there'd be 4 or 5 different poses. There would be a little bit maybe of a certain shirt or a tie or a skirt to wear, but he would put you at ease. And she said, Mr. Rockwell knew more about me than I knew about myself, because he would ask me questions to relax me and find out more about me, and he would know more about me than I knew about myself. So that's the type of a guy that he would be in tune to make you feel comfortable, make you laugh, have a little bit of fun, and then he was the boss. And when I speak on Mr. Rockwell's paintings, I say some of his paintings might remind you of a scene in a play. And when you go to a play, you're given a playbill, and the playbill lists who the director is, who the co-stars are, and who the stars are. So Mr. Rockwell's the director, the co-stars are all the people in the paintings, and the stars are the paintings. And that's how I present my talk on Mr. Rockwell.
Wow. Where was he educated? Formally educated? Was it an art education? Or
yes.
did he graduate?
He was born in New York City, and he did a little bit of illustrations early in his teenage years in New York. The family moved to Mamaroneck, New York, and based upon his artwork, he went to one of the schools he attended in New York was the Art Students League School. And there he was taught by a number of different artists, like Willie B. Maynard, Thomas Fogarty. He liked Vermeer, a painter of light. He followed him. And then the family moved to New Rochelle, New York. And at the time, in the 20s and stuff, New Rochelle was high cotton. George M. Cohen was up there. Films were being made up there. And there was another gentleman who was an illustrator and artist, J.C. Leyendecker. Leyendecker was kind of like Norman Rockwell before Norman Rockwell was Norman Rockwell, because he had a number of his paintings on the cover of the Post, Saturday Evening Post. He did 324 covers for the Post, and as I said, Mr. Rockwell did 323. So he got educated from schooling and meeting some of these wonderful illustrators and artists of the times that he was younger and learning about art itself. But that's one of the schools, the art students league. But there were other schools that he went to in and around that area of New York.
I appreciate that, but I'd like to know something about him on a personal level aside from his art. His philosophy, his ideology, something like that.
Well, I think not knowing him to have a conversation, but I heard, talk about this. He was a very down-to-earth gentleman. When he was very astute on scenarios that were happening in America. He wanted to picture, and he learned about that by talking to people, where he lived and how he traveled and how he worked with other artists as well. And he brought to his paintings his thought process on what America might want to see at that period of time. His education was really from the schooling, but also from getting your nails dirty by observing, talking, and asking questions about certain situations and how people reacted to that. He would sit in the Red Lion Inn in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and once in a while sketch people as they came in, or just sitting down and sketching people. And he would get the flavor of the common person by looking and being in the commonplace right in the situation where he could see this, interpret it, and then go from there.
In today's day, he would have been a great podcaster.
I'm sure, and he did a TV show with Edward R. Murrow for about a half hour. And
I remember that name.
In that TV show, he was just very cool and calm and collective about how he looked at things and how his family was and how he depicted art and so on and so forth. And that film is shown at the museum today.
Beautiful. Let's segue. I'd like to find out a little bit about you. You grew up in Queens.
Yes, sir.
What did you read as a kid?
I read, as growing up, I was an average student. I read Davy Crockett. I read Westerns. I read a little bit about getting a little bit older about baseball and the game itself, because I love the game. I read a lot of history of some of the baseball players of the 20s and 30s and 40s. I read a little bit more as I got older, probably in the early 1960s, a lot about Jackie Robinson, and sports books outside of a little bit of history. I read a little bit of war books like World War II and what was happening in Europe in World War II when I was a teenager. So that's generally what I read. It wasn't anything it just grabbed my mind, and I looked at this book and I said, oh, that's interesting. That looks interesting, just by looking at the cover and reading the back page and getting a synopsis of what the book might be about. But it was mostly sports.
Okay. Who was your mentor as a kid? Was it your dad or grandfather, uncles?
Yeah, my dad, you meet people. First, it was my father. My dad he worked as cutting leather for a number of big department stores in New York City for women's shoes. And he worked in Long Island City near the 59th Street Bridge. And he would come home. Yep. He would come home and, he would take the subway to the 111th Street bus on 111th Street in Richmond Hill from getting off at the Kew Garden station. And then he would come home. And I had a brother who was born 4 years after me with Down syndrome and 2 holes in his heart. And he would wheel around my brother on the wheelchair. He would bring him up on the subway, on the elevated train on Jamaica Avenue and take him for a ride. But he was the only father on our block to take me and my friends to baseball and hockey games. And he would have a catch with me every once in a while in the backyard. So he was kind of like my first mentor. And then I met another guy named Billy Veltri who played baseball for NYU as a second baseman. His brother was a friend of mine on our South Queens Boys Club baseball team, and Billy Veltri was a counselor there. And I admired him, the way he played the game, how he hustled, how intense he was. And he went into the Marines. And when President Kennedy was shot, he was one of the few people to clean out President Kennedy's office after he was assassinated. And he was just the way he spoke. You could see the way he competed in the game. And he taught me a lot about baseball itself and then life. If you strike out with the bases loaded in the first inning and you come up again, are you going to think about how you struck out the first time, or are you going to put the bat on the ball and get a base hit the second time up? So if you get knocked on your butt, pick yourself up, and you're ready in the batter's box again. And that has a lot to do with how I looked at life, too. So he was a great mentor to me.
I was going to say that transcends that baseball.
And then one more guy I would love to talk to you about. He was my college roommate's father. His name was Martin Deutsch. He was born in Wrocław, Poland. And I first met him when I was about 19 years old, 18 years old in Virginia. And he told us a story, and I'll be quick about it. His family was in Wrocław. They were grain dealers. They had a big house. They could ride their bicycles in the house, his brothers and sisters. And all of a sudden, his Christian friends didn't talk to him anymore. And that was because Hitler was coming into power. And his father said to him, I have a sponsor over in America for you in New York. Go meet this sponsor, and you help us out and get us out of here. So he went into Ellis Island. The sponsor gave him money and said bye-bye. He learned English by going to the movies. Long story short, he got his family mostly into Bolivia. One sister and brother stayed in Wrocław, and they perished. And this gentleman Martin Deutsch came back to St. Louis, became a salesman in a men's clothing store, and became later on a president of Berry Burke, which is under Hart, Schaffner and Marx in Richmond, Virginia. And he has a story. They have letters of back and forth between the brothers and sisters. It's called No Way Out, the Martin Deutsch story. And he was a mentor to me about how to look at things, how he related to stuff that was going on in his life, and how he kept forward with a positive attitude. He was a really cool mentor to me.
Wow. You can articulate these things. You didn't have to think. You knew your dad came first. He had the most influence. I'm assuming your younger brother is no longer with us.
Correct. He passed away at 19 years old. I was a senior at Husson University in Bangor, Maine, and one of my other roommates who came in I was pitching for the Husson baseball team, and he came in and just go home. I was married to my first wife at the time as a senior in college, and I found out that my brother passed away of a heart attack. And that was inevitable, the way his heart was, because at the time they didn't have these operations that could fix hearts like that. And he's just slowly, but he was a cool kid. Ronnie I'm an Italian guy, you know what I'm talking about? I got dark hair and brown eyes. My brother was blonde hair and blue-eyed. And he loved baseball, and he loved the name who was the first black player to play for the Boston Red Sox, Pumpsie Green. He loved that name.
He loved
Pumpsie Green.
I knew Pumpsie Green from being out here. He worked for Berkeley High School, and Alameda is really close to Berkeley. And when I first started doing podcasts about 10 years ago, I called to see if I could get an interview with him on the air. And his wife was so sweet, and she said, he's just not up to it anymore. And let's give the audience a little education on just what a pioneer he was. He was the first boy, and this is 1959.
Correct.
12 years after Jackie broke the color barrier, with the help of Mr. Rickey, of course. And the disgrace that the Red Sox had was that they were the owner was a racist, Tom Yorkie, and he hired people like I'm trying to think of the managers' names that were.
Way back when Higgins was Higgins.
Yes, Higgins, and there was some guy. One of them had a racist nickname. I don't remember that. Wasn't prepared. But Pumpsie Green, if you go to Berkeley High and reunions of people that graduated Berkeley High, they all have Pumpsie Green stories. He worked as kind of a maintenance guy, an advisor. He was just around Berkeley High School for years. And he was an inspiration to those kids. He wasn't quite as talented as some of the players that the Dodgers brought up early on. I don't think the Red Sox, or I do think they resisted for a long time having a black player, and I don't know if it still exists, but I know that based on the way Boston treated Bill Russell, that there's a horrible divide, not only in Boston but in this country as well. But
look at what Boston did. The Boston Bruins did with Willie O'Ree. He was the first African American to play for the Boston Bruins, and I'm so old that I saw him play at Madison Square Garden for the Rangers against the Rangers one night.
Well, I can tell you that I used to go down for autographs as a kid. Hockey players, basketball players, what have you. Go to the Biltmore Hotel. Go to the Roosevelt Hotel, right? Yes.
I was there. I might have ran into you, baby.
I'll bet I did, because, and I want to tell you that Willie O'Ree was a gentleman even back then. And I come to find out when they retired his number that he was blind in one eye, legally blind in one eye. And, if anybody has ever played hand-to-eye sports, where coordinating that, and hockey is really that, you could imagine what it took for someone, not only his color, but overcoming his physical problem. So he is a real hero, and I got to give the Bruins credit for doing what was righteous, retiring number 22, and that will always hang in the rafters. You'll be interested to know, as an old hockey fan, that I wrote a book recently called Comfortably Zoned in a Vat o' Pine Tar. And my co-author was George Grimm, who wrote 2 books about the Rangers. And so I could recommend his books. If you're a Ranger fan, I could recommend his books. And I'll ask you if you know Val Fontaine, if you remember the name.
He played for the Detroit Red Wings, and then he played for the Rangers. And I didn't miss a Ranger hockey game at the old Madison Square Garden from 1961 to 1968. And if you might remember, there was a little hockey rink above the old garden.
Yes, and with
Skateland, or Iceland, I think it's called.
You could skate there as a civilian, and the Rangers would practice there. And many times I went there and enjoyed the hell out of it, because I'd skate around and I'd just picture myself as Andy Bathgate,
Dean Prentice and Earl Ingerfield and Kenny Schinkel and those guys. Yes, sir.
Yes. Earl Ingerfield. I mentioned Val Fontaine because as a kid, you meet a kid like me, wanted autographs, wanted to find out what sports were about. I approached him going into the garden. I had just bought him a blue book, a Ranger blue book.
Yes, a little blue. It was a little book. I know exactly what it was. I have one still.
I asked Val if he would have everybody could you get autographs of everybody in the clubhouse, in not the club, dressing room. And he was nice enough to have everybody sign the 1964,
wow.
and he sent it back to me in an envelope that I provided. And I will always thank him because he was my connect with George Grimm. And
wow.
so did you go on on your Geo card? Did you go to?
Yes, 50 cents side balcony.
Side balcony, right? But you had to have you had to get there early. And
yes, the game started at 7. We'd be there at 4:30 in the afternoon.
Right, because if you go in and if you were anything on the side balcony in those days, if you were anything past the first two rows, you'd have to stand up the whole game.
Correct.
But the excitement of a hockey game at Madison Square Garden cannot be duplicated. It was, and the intensity, and Harry Howell, and they'd scream,
Number 3.
Harriet, where's your purse, Harriet? Because
hit him with your pocketbook. That's what I did. I got to tell you a quick story. There was one summer the Rangers would hold hockey camps up on top of that old Madison Square Garden, and Rod Gilbert, Vic Hadfield, Joe Schaefer, who was a practice goalie, was there, and I was the goalie. And we just started talking, Rod Gilbert and I, and him and I, when I would always see him in the garden, at the new garden when it first opened up, or later on in years after he retired from the Rangers, I would call him, "Hey, Rocky," and he would turn around. He knew, because everybody, that was his nickname. And it was so sorry to hear about his passing earlier this year. It was just a shame.
We are losing so many of our heroes when we were kids.
And that's the sad part about things, And
my grandmother warned me about getting old. It's a two-way sword. You're going to lose people. You're going to lose relatives. You're going to lose friends. It's horrible. What can I tell you? But George has some Eddie Shack stories that are incredible. He wrote a book about the history of Ranger goaltenders, and he has interviews with the Cat.
Amo Francis.
Right. It's a great book. It's a great series of books. 2 books that he wrote, and they're both great. And if you're a Ranger fan, you might look for those. Yes,
and that was all growing up then, and maybe you can relate to it. These hockey players, we would be in the visiting locker room, visiting near the locker room, and they would always be nice to you. There was never a person, except maybe Teddy Green, that would be unresponsive to you, and they would always say hello, shake your hand, put their glove out. If they had a broken stick, they'd give you a stick. It was just remarkable.
And including the superstars. I could remember sitting in the Roosevelt or the Biltmore, I can't remember which one, and these guys would hang. And I remember Gordie Howe was in the lobby sitting in a comfortable chair reading a newspaper. And I went over to him. I said, "Mr. Howe, can you blah, 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 blah." He said, "Sit down here a second. I want to get to know you before I sign an autograph."
Wow.
He just chatted away and was congenial. And I will agree with you 100%. There was not one of them that ever, Johnny Bauer, all these guys would sign and talk to you, and it almost made it seem like they were enjoying the experience as much as you were.
And you know who was a cool guy? You know who's really a nice guy? Eddie Jockerman. Eddie Jockerman, you talk about people that you looked up to. We would go to the Ranger fan club dances. They would have a dance in the early 60s where the fans can come in and sit at a table with a New York Ranger. And for 3 years, I sat at Eddie Jockerman's table and his wife, Marg Jockerman. And he was the nicest guy, and he would give me tickets when I was in college coming down to Boston. I would, through John Halligan, just meet him, John, who was a public relations director for the New York Rangers, and Jockerman or Halligan would have a ticket for me at the Boston Garden for a Ranger game, and I would stay overnight at the Madison Hotel. And I was in college at that time. I was a junior in college. I was, 20 years old, 21. I'd get down to Boston from Maine, and a friend of mine would drive down and stuff, and he'd go home and I'd go to the game. And he'd pick me up on Sunday morning. We'd go back up to Maine. It was cool, and Jockerman was just a real down-to-earth competitor, very passionate about stuff, but he was a really nice guy.
And a terrific goalie, I might add. He came in after the Gump left. I think he succeeded him.
Yep,
and
there was Marcel Pailly was there and stuff, and Cesar Maniago. And then Jockerman came in, and they shared some goaltending stuff, and it was wonderful. Hey, Ralph, I have to get going. I'm going to a tribute band of the Beatles tonight, and it's snowing and icy here, and I got to leave myself a lot of time to get over to this place in Albany. So, do you mind if we talk a couple more minutes and stuff, or is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? And I thank you for reaching out to me and doing this, sir.
We've completed it. If you've got to go early, and getting there early always helps. Wherever you're going, you get there and you don't have to worry about, am I late?
Yep.
And especially with
I'm
the
on
snow.
Lombardi time. I guess it's called Lombardi time.
Yes, Vince. Is that who you're referring to, Vince Lombardi?
Vince Lombardi, correct, yes. Yes.
Another Italian guy. You're really at home with your memories.
Oh, well, yes, but I can't remember the shopping list, as I mentioned to you before, that I left on the kitchen table to go food shopping, so forget about it, you know?
Well, you get going. We'll close this out. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and I so much enjoyed your company, Dan.
Well, thank you very much, and anytime you want to discuss anything, feel free to do this, and I sincerely appreciate you thinking of me, and it was great to talk a little bit about the days of our youth, and no matter what happens, and this is why I think I'd like to do a little bit more of this on myself, people our age or my age, we grew up with a certain way that likes sports and grew up in a certain area, and why we keep liking sports is that how did we do this? Who trained us? How do we inject ourselves into the game itself that we love and can keep doing it? What were some of the few idealistic things that we did that made us the way we are today? That would be interesting. I look back and I say, how did I get here? I don't know.
But you're here.
That's all that counts, baby. That's all.
And you're still here.
Yep.
What Casey Stengel say, not everybody is still here. You could look it up. You know.
Right. And I follow a Satchel Paige quote: "Don't look back. Someone might be gaining on you."
Absolutely. Thank you, sir, for a great interview.
Thank
I'll
you.
send you a link to it and spread it around. I
will, sir.
your company.
Thanks a lot. Be safe out there in Alameda and enjoy your time in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Thank you, sir. Be
Thank
well.
you. Good night.
Thank you, everybody,
Bye-bye.
for listening. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tyko, and this was a good one. Thanks again, Dan.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices, and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.